Okay, we're live, everyone. So we'll go ahead and get started. I just wanted to welcome everyone today to our MWW Talks. If you're following the conversation on Twitter and want to join along, send any questions, have any thoughts to add to the discussion today, just use the hashtag MWW Talks. Today we're talking about going global. So there's been a huge rush to scale in the past few years with social, thinking about how we can communicate globally, taking something from one small market and moving it to multiple languages across multiple channels. But something gets lost in that. And so how can we start to take some of the insights and tools that we've used on a big global scale and now drive it down to a more local level? How can we make things more nuanced for certain cultures, for certain issues, or for specific audiences? So today with me, I'm really excited to have two experts in this field to help us think through this approach and how we might scale down instead of always just scaling up. With me, I have Toby Daniels, CEO and co-founder of CrowdCentric. He's also the founder and executive director of Social Media Week. Toby, you want to say hi to everyone?
Hi, everyone.
You took that very literally. And then I also have Alex Busnego, who's head of business and digital innovation for the Miami Marlins. Alex, you want to say hi to everyone as well?
Hi to everyone as well.
Great. So I'm really excited to have both of you here today. I think you'll both have really unique perspectives, and particularly as we think through what are some of the big learnings that we can take away from broader global strategies to apply to a more global or local level, but then also what are some of those things that are must-haves? So when you start to think about engaging a local audience or a very niche audience, what's that one thing you've got to do to check that box and make sure you're doing that well? So with that, I thought I would kick off with the first question for Toby. What are some of the lessons you've learned in building Social Media Week or working with Social Media Week local leaders as you've scaled Social Media Week across multiple markets? Is there any sort of personal experience or learning that you've come out of those scalings and those moves into other markets?
Yeah, definitely. Well, obviously, we started Social Media Week back in 2009. Originally, we actually hosted the conference just here in New York City, and obviously took a very sort of specifically local view of what was happening in this sort of particular space. But since then, we've grown to more than 25 cities, around 20 different countries around the world. And we now host Social Media Week across 6 different continents. And so we've been able over that time to build, I think, a really unique understanding and perspective of how technology is impacting how we as humans are connecting and communicating. And of course, the change that we've seen, even in just the last sort of 5 or 6 years, has been fairly profound and has had a sort of transformative effect, I think, on society at large. And so, our role, as we see it, really is to continue to capture and curate the sort of various insights and understandings and trends and analysis around how this is all shaping society, and share as much of that with the rest of the world as we possibly can. And over that time, we've started to kind of, I think, look at some of the much bigger and broader and more macro trends that we see that are sort of impacting the world in the most significant way, and certainly that will impact in the next few years. We've basically connected about 3 billion or so people over the course of the last 15 or 20 years, just a little bit shy of half of the planet's population. The key thing for us to all understand, and certainly what we've been looking very closely at during many of our Social Media Week conferences, is the fact that in the next 8 to 10 years, we're going to connect another 3 billion people. So that by around 2022, there will be about 6 billion people connected to each other through social media, through mobile technology. And the key thing there, the most important aspect of this, is the fact that most of those new people coming online and connecting for the first time will be doing so in the developing world, in parts of like Latin America, Asia, Africa, etc. And the question, I think, that sort of naturally that we naturally sort of want to ask is, well, what does that mean? And in particular, how is it going to change society? How is it going to change culture? How is it going to impact business? And how ultimately can humans achieve more in this new connected world where there will be upwards of 6 billion people communicating to each other over the course of the day? And so, what are some of the things that we've learned, specifically in terms of expanding Social Media Week over the years? Three things that have come to mind, really. One, understanding the nuances of local culture and local languages is critically important in communications, in marketing, in figuring out how we can sort of take advantage and capitalize on these networks of communication that exist over sort of geographical and cultural boundaries. The second thing I think has been really important to us is this idea of taking a sort of bottom-up approach to innovation rather than being dictatorial and being top-down. And from a conference programming standpoint and from a media and communications and news perspective, what that means is figuring out how to build an infrastructure and a network that can enable the best ideas and the best information and news to kind of surface from all of these local markets, and then figure out what is the best way in which we can capture, curate, and then share a lot of that local knowledge with the rest of the world. And then finally, just in thinking about what we've learned, and by the way, I can go on and on because there's so much that we have learned over the years.
We have lots of questions, so we'll get to it.
The third thing that I think has been really important to us is that, when we designed Social Media Week so that our local teams and local markets were ostensibly responsible for producing all of the content and the events and the programming, what we found is that in doing it that way, some of the best and most unexpected things happened as a result. And designing for the unexpected, I think, is something that we've learned over the years as being something that's really important to bake into the way that we build these distributed conferences. And so those are just a couple of things. As I say, I can kind of talk a lot more about some of the things that we've learned over the years.
That's all really interesting, and I think that the theme you're picking up on, also the even in one local area, you're still communicating at times with multiple different cultures, different language, different interests, different personalities. And I think, Alex, that's actually something that probably resonates a lot with you, working with the Miami Marlins in Miami, which obviously has a really diverse culture in and of itself. So your immediate fan base is pretty diverse. And then you're thinking about how you connect with fans who are maybe very niche in the sense that they're Marlins fans, but they're not necessarily in Miami. How do you sort of balance that and juggle that, particularly when you're communicating as part of a much larger organization like Major League Baseball? And I just have to throw into this question, go Nats.
Oh, that's disappointing. Well, yeah, we'll see. I think we're playing you guys soon, so we'll see who comes up victorious. But yeah, I mean, I think you hit it on the head. Miami is a pretty global city, and baseball appeals to a lot of different cultures, and marketing it to a lot of different groups of people within the very same market, quote unquote, is an interesting puzzle to solve, and that's what they pay us to do, I guess. That's our challenge, but Miami's diversity is a beautiful thing in a lot of ways. Obviously there's a huge Cuban population, there's a huge Venezuelan population, there's a huge American population, and so on and so forth. And everyone kind of responds to different messages, and that's frustrating and exciting all at once. And I think what digital techniques have allowed for is kind of a more targeted approach to be able to speak to everyone in their own A, language, and B, just in the way that they prefer. The other challenge is Miami seems to be a town where everyone's from somewhere else. So there's kind of an identity issue. A lot of people feel like they are a Philadelphian living in Miami, or a Cuban living in Miami, or Venezuelan living in Miami. But does anyone really feel Miamian? It's an interesting challenge. And so we kind of splice and dice our marketing in a lot of different chunks. And I think that's exciting, but it also leads to some challenges. Does the person from Venezuela or from the Dominican, let's say, root for the Leones from the Dominican, or do they root for the Marlins? They grew up rooting for the team in the Dominican. So how do we start to chip away at that and say, you don't have to give up your passion for your hometown team, but maybe this is your chance to have your American team. So it's an interesting thing, I'd say, an interesting situation we have here, and probably fairly unique, I'd say, given that we're all within the same market. geographically. But even geographically, there's such diversity. One neighborhood, our billboards are in a completely different language than the others. There's different players on different ones depending on kind of maybe who might be the favorite in different areas. So it's about as global an approach within the same single community as you can probably find. I think our biggest priority as an organization in the last couple of years, and certainly moving forward, is we've made a pretty firm seismic shift toward data, towards understanding more about our customers than ever before, so that we can market to them as individuals, locally, if you will. So we have more data than we know what to do with, right? We know who comes to our games, who buys tickets, who who we send emails to, down the list. Being able to unite those pieces of information to make sense of it, come up with insights both at a macro level and micro level, so that we can get to the day where we're talking to each individual as an individual and no longer in a mass kind of way. I think that's our priority, and I think that speaks to the challenges of this kind of global market that we're in. Being able to fine-tune an approach even further, I think, is what data is going to allow us to do.
That's really interesting, and I think the data piece is really key. I think when you start to use those insights, it allows you to be more specific, and then it also allows you to think about the tools you have to communicate and how you can drive specific messages to very specific audiences on social platforms. It's sort of the beauty of social, is that you can be local. But as you think about data, Toby, what sort of trends have you gleaned and insights have you gleaned as you've scaled in different markets? Are there certain things that connect the markets that you see over and over again? And then are there certain things that are different in every market?
Sure. Well, as I mentioned before, we've definitely scaled very quickly. I mean, in about, I think it was two and a half years, we went from one city to about 20 cities. And during that time, we hosted in Brazil, Colombia, Buenos Aires, in Argentina, Mexico City, Bangalore, Seoul, Korea, Moscow. We've really sort of expanded quite substantially, but across so many different diverse cultures. And what's really interesting is that while technology is permeating all of these cultures in lots of extraordinary ways, and while there are true differences, true cultural differences in how people in different cultures connect and communicate, and of course where they are and how advanced or mature the culture is in regards to how much technology is sort of permeated that particular society. For me, what has been even more profound has been the similarities. The fact that we're, to a certain extent, more the same than we are different. And what I've personally kind of started to think a lot about and draw inspiration from is this idea that behavior and trends are actually more generationally specific than they are culturally specific, in that pretty much all young people everywhere where there is an internet connection and access to smartphone devices tend to love short form communication, SMS, Snapchat, WhatsApp, all of these different sort of tools and applications that allow them to communicate in short bursts with very limited amount of language use, and often in many cases where you have applications like Snapchat instead, where they prefer actually just to communicate with imagery, or Instagram in terms of how they can express themselves creatively. And that's true just everywhere. I mean, all young people like to communicate in that way. It doesn't matter whether you're Brazilian or whether you're English or whether you're from, Argentina or from, Japan. There are extraordinary similarities from a behavioral standpoint. And that's something for us to kind of think about. And there's something really good about that. In the sense that it brings us closer together, and in particular where you're using Snapchat or Instagram, which overcomes the kind of the language barriers that often prevent us from sort of connecting as human beings. But there's also a kind of a negative aspect to us, the aspect to it that we should be quite conscious of, which is that we are becoming more homogenous as a society, as a culture. We're becoming more similar than we are different, and that will continue over time. The more connected we are, the more networked our communications become, the more we will become similar to each other. So over the course of the next 100 years, we're going to see profound changes. And I think there's something about that that just sort of stopped me in my tracks and made me think about, what is my role, what is our organization's role in understanding the importance and significance of that, and what we should ultimately do to protect the diversity of the various different cultures around the world.
That's really interesting, and I think that ties back to a question that I wanted to ask Alex, which is, how do you add in that local flavor as you start to think about fans who may not be in your own market, but they're huge fans of the Miami Marlins? How do you bring that local flavor on social media to some of those other markets?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. So from a business standpoint, our main objective is to drive revenue, which the main way to do that is to sell tickets. We have 37,000 seats and 81 home games regular season. So, that's kind of our main business objective. And if you're not within, 50-mile radius roughly, odds are you're not coming to a lot of games. So it presents an interesting marketing challenge because, about 60, I think it's 60% last I checked of our fans are actually within that radius. So there's a huge percentage of our fans that it's important to communicate to them. They're not necessarily driving the business forward, but they do serve an incredibly important purpose. Nonetheless are very important. So it's an interesting dynamic. So while the majority of our spend from a marketing standpoint goes into the local, geographic area of people more likely to attend Marlins games here at Marlins Park on a repeat basis, being able to communicate to really the entire area of Latin America, which is where a lot of our fans come from. We're referred to sometimes as the team of the Americas, because we do have kind of that identity throughout Latin America. It's really interesting, and I think being able, we kind of have a full multicultural marketing department, right? So, and that kind of goes department by department. So whether it's marketing, whether it's communications, whether it's community outreach, whether it's the Marlins Foundation, whether it's sales, every department is not divided in two, but takes two very distinct approaches.
Thank you, Jenny.
And it's more than translation. It's really understanding the needs of that particular department and of that particular audience, and kind of merging two. So it's kind of a very it's a process that's very central to the way we do business.
And that begs a question for me, and this is for both of you really. Is there a platform or a tool, whether it's Facebook or Vine or Snapchat, that you feel like works both best at a global scale and at a local scale?
Social has the advantage of being able to kind of refine the message geographically or age-wise. So those are some great things. The majority of our ticket purchasers, repeat ticket purchasers, are not necessarily the most avid users of social media. So we kind of have to balance that. Social media's purpose for us is to inspire word of mouth among our fans. So we assume if you like us or you follow us, you really must like us a lot, and thus we're not trying to convince you to be a Marlins fan. We're trying to convince you to spread the message to your friends who may or may not be on social media. So it's really not social media. I'd say sparking word of mouth is kind of one of our biggest priorities. Taking those that actually love us and consume us and are repeat business partners of ours and come to a lot of games, inspiring them to the point where they want to share the message to their friends, using social, using SMS, using email. That's one of our three goals. We've kind of, roughly identified that there are three ways to get someone's attention in today's world. One is to have it come from their friend, have it be a word of mouth kind of message. Number two is to just solve a pain point. If there's a way to skip the line at the concession stand, we're going to have our consumers' attention. And I think we do a good job at that, so that you won't experience big lines at Marlins Park. And third is to have just a really targeted custom message. And that's really kind of where our priority is moving forward with our deep dive into analytics and into data. How do we present a targeted custom message that's built for you? It's a huge challenge. Requires a lot of infrastructure, requires a lot of processes to be thrown out the window, and a lot of new ones to be created. A lot of inertia has to be disturbed, but that's what we're trying to do. So building those platforms and those mechanisms so that we can target each person as an individual. And if I know you only come to Saturday games, it would be foolish for me to market a Monday game to you, right? I know you're probably a Saturday game kind of fan. If I know you come with your family, then I really shouldn't be marketing to you a message for our Clevelander, which is our nightclub in left field, because that's probably not going to appeal to your family. So being able to just understand to a pretty nuanced and detailed degree what your preferences are, what your needs are, I think is kind of the third way of how to break through and kind of actually get through to a customer in today's world.
Toby, that question for you as well. Is there one specific tool or platform within social that you feel like works best at both a global and a local level?
I wish there were a tool or platform that did everything that we needed in terms of how we communicate, but I'm not sure that tool will ever exist. We do a substantial amount of communication via email. We have almost 200,000 people that are subscribed to Social Media Week globally, and we're communicating them through a variety of different sort of email marketing channels. And it's very, very challenging to be targeted, even if you know where they are in the country that they're in, and to be communicating with them in Portuguese, for example. It's actually just really hard and resource intensive to be able to do that in upwards of 15 different languages, which I think is what we're probably operating in right now. And then, when you think about all of the various other different tools and channels that we operate, there are definitely some language and also sort of culturally specific challenges that we face every day. I mean, Facebook is by far the most sophisticated, I think, in terms of how it's localized, I think, its platform and its entire operating system. And we operate at the moment 30 local Facebook presences in addition to a global one. And thankfully, there's very little that we need to do in terms of tailoring or customizing them to each local market, because Facebook already does that for you. But having said that, it would be wonderful to be able to publish something in English that then also translates into all the various different languages according to the people that it reaches. But it doesn't do that. So I say Facebook is definitely one of the most sophisticated. Twitter is good in terms of being able to at least translate in real time fairly effectively. A lot of the communication that's coming at us, so that we can kind of organize it and think about how we can react and respond and support our community. But we face substantial challenges every day in terms of how to sort of navigate all of this.
Great. Well, I thank you both for this conversation. It's been really great. And as we close out on our time together today, I just wanted to ask from both of you what you think the one thing brands need to think about from a Glocal standpoint for 2015. So, Toby, we'll start with you.
I mean, I think going back to a couple of the points that I made earlier, which I think are just as sort of transferable to a brand that is trying to develop a global strategy with all of the local sort of communication nuances sort of built in. I think it's critically important to deeply understand the local markets and the local cultures that you are essentially engaging in, and there is no better way of doing that than essentially building local teams that are essentially on the ground and connecting and engaging in whatever capacity. That local knowledge is critically important, and trying to second guess how to navigate the nuances of local culture is the shortest path to failure. And so I think that's probably the most important thing. And the other things that I mentioned earlier were to do with sort of bottom up versus top down, and and designing for unexpected results, because the beautiful, magical, sort of creative ideas that often really resonate, I think, in this sort of both in a global and local way, often come from these local markets, and so designing for that is crucially important.
Great. And then Alex, I'll let you have the last word on that. What do you think the one takeaway for 2015 is?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not for 2015. I think it's just kind of in general. They teach you in business school that the kind of core of marketing is right message, right place, right time. What digital has done is allowed you to kind of do that in a far more fine-tuned manner. The biggest thing is understanding your audience, understanding your market. It's really easy, and I'm guilty of it, to skip the research and to not do market research and to assume that just translation is enough, and it's generally not. You'll get okay results if you do that. I think doing your research, understanding what people want and don't want, understanding data points and how they've changed over time based on within a single customer profile. We've been really surprised in good ways and bad ways at how some of the most basic assumptions we've made have just been incorrect. Have just been completely counterintuitive. It's fascinating, and it's awesome to be able to learn from that and iterate from that. But it starts with understanding the market as a whole on a macro level, but also at a micro level and also at a per user basis. And I think that's a principle that won't get old, no matter what technology comes out next after social media. When we're all talking into our watches in 15, maybe it'll be. I think it's going to also maintain then. So I think that's kind of the number one thing.
Great. Well, I think that the sort of areas where you're both aligned are the really important ones we should focus on as takeaways as we end this conversation, and it's really about knowing your audience. So understanding what they care about, what motivates them, what needs they have that you can meet and help fill. Doing a deep dive on the market, understanding the different cultures, the different languages, and the different opportunities that come into play. Data, obviously huge, using data to not only help understand those different opportunities, but also using that data to help sort of fuel some insights into what your strategy might be and what your messages should be. And then also making sure those messages are really relevant to specific audiences. I think as we think about Glocal, to me it really just means whether you're communicating to a very niche audience in the town next door or on a global scale, making sure that those messages that you create are really relevant to the people you're talking to, and not really taking a one-size-fits-all approach is going to be critical for brands as they look to scale both up and scale down. So with that, thank you so much, guys. We really appreciate your participation today.
You got it.
No problem.
Goodbye, Toby. It's been nice.
Cheers.
Bye,
Yeah, good to
Alex.
connect.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Have a good one.